Welcome, everybody. This is the Partner Accelerator series. Um, we give people here a couple minutes to join, but we're going to be talking about attack surface management today and how you can build your sales pitch to C-suite. So I'm Eric Wing. I'm technical director. I've got Russ Ollis is joining me, solution architect. He's the true brains behind everything here today. But do appreciate everyone joining us here today. So just kind of wanted to level set. I know there's some misunderstandings of what ASM is. Sometimes you'll hear people say ASRM. I know we use that quite a bit. It's attack surface management or attack surface risk management. And what that is, the threat actors, they always need an entry point or a way to get into an environment to start doing what it is they're trying to do. And that entry can be through credentials, through the user accounts, through the endpoints, your servers, your cloud. There's a lot of different ways they can get in. And of course, there's a lot of different malicious activities they can do. They could be using compromised credentials. They could actually do phishing attacks, ransomware. There's a lot of different things that they can potentially do. So how does somebody know and have visibility to all these things? People read the news all the time. They see things about vulnerabilities coming out or people exploiting vulnerabilities. And people always want to know, hey, am I susceptible to that? What's the likelihood that something's going to happen in my environment? So that's really what ASM is going to address, is how you can answer those kind of questions. ASM is fully integrated into our XDR and within our Vision One platform. So it does allow you to reduce incidents because, again, you can proactively mitigate. You can see where those risks are, and you can go ahead and address those. It is going to give you detection, and that's going to go back on the risk side. So as things are detected, you're going to see that activity reflected in the ASM scoring and other things. To do your triage, your investigations, that's also mapped. Whoops. And your responses can also be, action on that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and toss it off to Russ, and he's going to start giving us a demo here and look the way things are. So cool. Let me go ahead and stop sharing. Cool.
So as Eric mentioned, my name is Russ Ollis. Been on board with Trend about 2 years. Came over from the customer side. I used to sit in a deputy CISO role. And so I've been kind of on the Vision One SME team for a couple of years now, really talking to customers and partners about Vision One as a sort of full spectrum security operations platform. I do lean heavily into attack surface and risk as part of kind of my talking points, because that's, let's honestly, where I'm most comfortable, where I came from. So as Eric sort of mentioned to you, right, we've got this problem out there in the world, right? Like attack surface, just in general, it's just expanding wildly, like all the time. And cloud has only really sort of made that just much, much worse, right? Most of our security problems in operations really stem from a lack of asset management and visibility, right? If I don't know what I have, it's very difficult for me to understand if what I have has the right set of controls, if that asset is being, interrogated for whatever, right? So there's this problem that we're addressing with attack surface discovery and management to help customers get an understanding of what are the elements that comprise their attack surface. How important are those aspects to their business operations, right? That's the two things that are really, really critical, right? Is what do you have? How does it operate in the context of your business? And then the third thing that we're talking about is what are the risk conditions associated with an asset, right? So does it have misconfigurations or vulnerabilities? If it's a device, if it's a user, are those users involved in sort of suspicious activities or strange behaviors? From an internet-facing perspective, right? What do you look like to the outside world in terms of your public face, right? Like anything that's out there. We're looking at application use, and as I mentioned, there's a cloud aspect of this as well, where we can bring in cloud attack surface and really start to help folks understand how has cloud really actually been implemented in your environment versus what your governance policy might have said was supposed to happen, right? Because we gave developers the cloud and we kind of turned them loose, and they took us up on it, right? And they have deployed like wild, and they're building code and they're deploying apps and they got all this stuff going on, and that can be a really, really complicated area to discover and understand. So all of that kind of frames up the problem a little bit more. What we're doing in particular, and sort of how this kind of relates to you guys, right, is talking to customers around how they manage risk. How do they identify and prioritize risk in their environment? And then how do they translate that understanding of risk into actionable, measurable plans to effectively reduce risk so that they can limit the likelihood that they have an event, right? I frame this up in the context of sort of left of bang and right of bang activities, the bang being sort of when the incident begins. So today we're going to talk about a whole bunch of left of bang stuff, and it's really all geared towards just what we talked about, right? How do we know the things and the people and the applications in our environment that are creating opportunities for breaches to occur? How do we prioritize them? How do we mitigate them or remediate them? And then how do we demonstrate that in terms of operational value and program outcomes and all that stuff, right? So,
hey, we do have a couple questions here, Russ.
sure.
So someone was asking if this is acceptable only to business applications or what applications could be covered.
Yeah, so in the context of applications, we're really looking at it in the context of SaaS applications and services that the user community is consuming, or applications and services that have been deployed either as cloud infrastructure or as SaaS services that are, user facing from a customer environment, right? There is an aspect of this that's on, I think it's going to be released next quarter, where we're going to start doing local device inventory and picking up sort of installed applications and those sorts of things from the individual assets themselves. But right now it's really focused on what are the applications folks are using. Does that answer the question?
I believe so. And then there was somebody who was asking, and this question comes up quite a bit sometimes. We're using the phrase, XDR here. They're asking, how this compares, or is the same thing as EDR? I don't know if you want to answer that, Russ, or I certainly can as well.
Yeah, jump in, if you want to, or I'm happy to.
Yeah, EDR is endpoint detection response, so it's using telemetry data from the endpoint. And a lot of people do have a heavy focus on the endpoints because that's where the users are operating. Within Trend and other companies as well, if you start using telemetry that beyond the endpoint, so you're looking at email information, you're looking at network information, that's what XDR comes in, because that first letter could kind of be anything. So it's multiple sources of telemetry that are correlating together.
Yep. And I'm getting ready to jump into how that stuff, how do we collect it? What do we collect it from? And how do we use it? Because we use that same set of telemetry that we collect from all of those sensor types for both the risk reduction use case and the detection and response use case, right? So it's a very powerful way to get a lot of value out of the same set of data. So right here, this is sort of my list of data sources. It's changing all the time. Trend Micro made a very intentional decision early in our XDR journey to sort of institute a hybridized approach to sensor deployment, right? We want to use our native telemetry everywhere we can because that telemetry is already normalized. We already understand it. It's well formatted, very, very deep and complete telemetry that we can use for a lot of different use cases. But Trend Micro doesn't do everything, right? So I have an endpoint sensor, I have an email sensor that integrates with Office 365 or the Google Suite. I have a network telemetry sensor where I can pull telemetry right off the wire. All of my protection layer products that you guys are probably familiar with already that we've been selling for a long time, they all sort of serve a dual purpose role in this world where they are also telemetry providers, right? So I'm bringing in lots of native telemetry. And then down here, you'll notice I have a pretty good list of third-party telemetry sources that I use where I either don't have a capability there or there's an existing vendor in that space that it's not going to make sense for me to try to do what they do, right? For example, Tenable. There's no reason for me to try to reinvent the vulnerability assessment wheel because Tenable and Rapid7 and Qualys, those are folks who have been doing that a long time. They do a really good job and they have a really broad footprint, right? So for customers who have those products deployed in their environment, I can bring that set of data in and use it to enrich all of the data that I collect, right? So you can start to see how we can really increase the value of some existing investments by breaking down some data silos and bringing a lot of stuff together into a view where I can see different kinds of risk in context with each other. And so that's how this data comes together. We bring it in from the sensors, we identify those assets that are part of the attack surface, we begin to assess them for business value and risk, and then we start to show folks, here's what's in your attack surface, right? So I'm going to go out here to attack surface. And based on all of those feeds that I have coming in, I'm going to show you what I've discovered, what I can assess for risk, what's managed or unmanaged, right? In the context of each of these device or asset categories across the top, right? So from a device perspective, in my small little lab environment, there's about 66 devices that I've discovered. Some of them are managed. I'm assigning risk scores. I'm picking up all kinds of interesting data about these things. These are all drillable, and you can see lots of interesting stuff. From an internet-facing perspective, I got a couple of public-facing domains that I'm assessing, which is a very similar to a Shodan type functionality, where we are enumerating those public domains, discovering the assets that are in the public-facing assets, and assessing them for risk and misconfiguration and unexpected services and all the things that can happen out there. Identity, right? Identity risk, identity detection and response. It's a big talking point right now because attackers don't really want to go through the work of having to break in. They want to steal somebody's credentials so they can just log in, right? So I can show you who are the accounts in your environment from AD, Azure AD, Okta, right? I can bring in that identity information and start to identify and prioritize identity assets and risk, again, in the context of high profile users, as well as risk and those sorts of things, right? So this becomes a very powerful set of information for customers to understand what they have, like what's in the environment and what am I going to do with it, right? We mentioned applications. You can see sort of all of the SaaS apps and whether they're sanctioned or unsanctioned, and then cloud assets, right? I can pull stuff out of Azure, AWS, Google in terms of SaaS, all that. So I have all these things and I can start to see what they are. Yes.
Russ, somebody is asking a question here. Would it be able to identify an infected printer or a vulnerable printer that was in the environment?
Yeah, so using that network telemetry sensor, right? Because a printer is an unmanaged device. I can't put an agent on an endpoint, right? But if that printer or that thermostat or that whatever that building automation device, whatever it is, right? That telemetry that I can pull off of the wire is going to help me include that particular asset in both my risk assessment work as well as my detection and response work, right? So from a managed endpoint, I'm going to see half of the conversation. From the network view, I'm going to see the rest of the conversation around that unmanaged asset. So we can pull that stuff in through the network telemetry sensor. Cool.
Hey, kind of on that same vein, Russ, here, so going through things. How can you use this information to, reduce your exposure to the risk?
Oh, so that you should ask.
So, yeah,
we're going to do it right now, right?
Okay.
So that's really where it comes together, right? I can show you what's in your environment, but it's not enough that I just give you a big list of problems, right? Here's a whole bunch of things that are of concern to you. What's much more important is that for each one of those categories of assets that I discover, I'm giving you a guided approach to understand what are the things that you need to look at first, right? So in my device inventory, there are 4 devices with highly exploitable CVEs, and I can drill into those. This is some of that upward facing information, right? Again, coming from that CISO role, I was always looking for trends and, sort of KPIs and dashboard type information that I could share with my leadership or share with our county managers to help them understand what we were doing over time. And that's sort of what we're doing here is, hey, this is what you look like, over the last few weeks, your vulnerability management's going well or it's not going well. But we can show you all that stuff in terms of how your assets are sort of doing for an upward view to leadership. But what I think is even more important is from an operational perspective, right? I get all of this data from all of these sources. And a lot of times I have some of this data today, but customers struggle to figure out where to start, right? They start normally with the things they're most comfortable with instead of starting on the thing that is going to bring the most return for their investment, right? So we take all of that risk information that we discover and prioritize, and we put it into this risk reduction workflow where I can see all of the kinds of risk across all of these risk types in the entire asset inventory that I've been able to discover. And I can prioritize them for you in a way that helps you understand where should you focus to get the most out of your risk reduction efforts. This is life-changing, this risk reduction workflow, right? If you would like to get, you guys probably, there's probably somebody who's been long enough to remember stoplight reports, but if you want to get from yellow to green, this is the list of work that you need your team to accomplish. This is the number of assets that are involved. This is how much impact it's going to have on your score, right? That is very powerful information that you can present to folks to say, these are the things you need to be working on from a task perspective. And from a strategic perspective, this is the information that customers can share with leadership to say, this is why we're working on the things we're working on, and this is how we know we're doing the right things. This is very, very important. So you drill into these, you get some detail about what is the finding, what are the assets that are impacted by the finding. We'll give you some recommendations about what you need to do, what you need to change. And then as we mitigate or remediate these findings, those risk scores will come down to reflect sort of the work that you've done, right? So not only can you forecast the work, but you can demonstrate that you got the work done because the number is going in the right direction. That is a very, very powerful way to use this platform from a customer perspective. From a partner perspective, oh, go ahead, Greg. What you got?
No, I was just going to say, and maybe you're getting this, but somebody is asking about, they're a managed service provider.
Yep.
And, they want to know if Vision One is required. And of course, I know we do have the Vision One available for service providers. I'll put that link in chat so everybody can have it.
Yep.
But they were thinking if they did that we manage their environment versus the partner still having the capability to do that, which I don't know if you want to touch on that because they're multi-tenancy role-based. They can still manage the customer's environment.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to get into this ecosystem from a service provider perspective. As Eric mentioned, we have a whole program where we're onboarding MSSPs, and there's a multi-tenant, multi-user sort of full MSSP level of this platform where you would manage multiple customer instances, or you could just aggregate logs and do the correlations and those sorts of things using Vision One as sort of the SOAR kind of component of that. For customers who own Vision One, you can manage their instance of Vision One. You could co-manage their instance of Vision One. So if you got questions about that, we got a specific team who does MSSP stuff. We would love to connect you and let you really get your questions answered at a very deep level. Any other questions you got right now, Eric?
Yeah, no, I think we're good. So I did put the MSP link in the chat too. So if anybody's interested in that, you can go to it.
Yep. So what we're doing here, right, is we're using this information to show customers risk, but from a channel perspective, right, from a partner side, if you're, what do you do with this, right? So one of the things that we've been really sort of exploring as a way to introduce this and drive conversations and provide immediate value and hopefully some response from customers is to use the Vision One platform as a risk assessment tool, right? If I come to a customer or a prospect and offer them a cyber risk assessment, right, you can use this technology and these sensors to assess that environment, discover that risk, show them what their situation looks like, right? And that can drive a lot of conversations about, oh, I got all this risk. How am I going to start to address it, right? And so a lot of the sensors, in fact, most of the sensor types that we deploy are very non-intrusive, right? It's API integrations or very light touch type stuff. And the one sensor, there is an endpoint sensor that does give a whole lot of information about sort of the endpoint landscape and sort of what's going on there. It's a very high value sensor. It's easy to deploy. It will coexist with any EPP or EDR solution that they already have. So if they're running some other vendor and they're only getting the detection and response side of the house, and they would like to understand what the left of bang stuff looks like, you can put that sensor in place on the endpoints. We don't enable any of the detection and response functions. We just enable the risk assessment functions, and we can start to populate this kind of information so that you can start to help customers understand we don't want to spend all our time in detection and response, right? We don't want to wait for the thing to happen before we try to get ahead of it. We would love to know what we look like in a pre-event context so that we can prioritize our risk reduction activities to work on the things that will hopefully keep us out of detection and response, right? Because ultimately that's what we're working towards. I want to put my detection and response people out of business. I want to be so good at mitigation and prevention that it really is a 0 day or some really crazy activity that causes that event to begin, right? Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I was just gonna say somebody's asking a question here, and this is actually good for something that we need to mention. They're asking specifically, Microsoft obviously is pushing Defender. There's other security providers out there, and you don't know what the differences are. One thing I would point out is everything that Russ is showing you here, and the entire ASRM system, that's available whether or not you're a Trend Micro customer. This can be purchased by itself.
Yep.
So you can actually deploy this in addition to Defender or in addition to Sentinel-1 or CrowdStrike or anybody else. So this is not exclusively unique that it has to be a Trend customer.
Exactly.
So
exactly. Yep. Yeah. And that coexistence, like I said, a lot of the folks that we compete with are really not leaning into the risk side of the house as aggressively as we are, right? They're much more focused on detection and response. Cyber liability carriers are focused on detection and response. But the reason they're focused on detection and response is because they don't have the capability to assess risk. Any insurer is actually much more interested in risk conversations. What are you doing to prevent a claim? Not how well can you show me what happened when you file a claim, right? That's a big distinction to make around insurance and insurance context, right? Car insurance, they got decades of fiduciary, or of actuarial data to look at and understand trends and risk exposure. They don't have that in cyber liability, right? So this is data that they can use to help frame a lot of conversations with a lot of people, whether it's customer side, vendor side, carrier side, whatever. This risk information is very, very powerful and valuable for a lot of use cases and conversations. So that's kind of how to think about where this thing lands. A lot of customers may have some siloed parts of this in their environment already, but they can't see it in sort of cohesive, sort of contextual way. The guy that runs the vulnerability management program, he's got his report, and the endpoint guy's got his report, and the asset manager's got his report, and they don't really ever put them together. This brings all of that information together in context and allows you to sort of process it or synthesize it in the right order, in the right context, right? I challenge folks all the time. Is it more important to be doing things right or doing the right things, right? And you can absolutely be doing the wrong thing perfectly, but that still makes it it's the wrong thing to do, right? If you've got a big public-facing hole in your infrastructure, let's fix that first, right? That's a real risk that carries some significant, problems with it versus this other thing, right? So this helps teams really get focused on how to effectively prioritize their workloads and gives them the data to help communicate what they're doing, how well it's going, are we getting value? If this number is going the wrong way, they can tell a story about what they need, right? I need time, I need money, I need people, I need something. If you want this number to go down, help me get it done, right? Reallocate some resources. So there's so many good ways that this data can be used, but a lot of it begins with that risk assessment piece, right? Do they even know what they have or not? And if they don't know what they have, can we show them what they have? And once we show them what they have, then we can start to have all the conversations about how we can help them bring that number down, right? And that, as you guys know, that's going to open up a whole lot of other types of conversations. So that's how, I've approached it with customers. That's how I've encouraged other partners to approach it with customers. Look at it as sort of a risk assessment tool. Conversation starter to talk.
Yeah, a couple things here, Russ said. When I'd point out, this is continuous, the monitoring as well too. So it's not just a snapshot in time, so you can see the line going across there. So that's really important too. A lot of you mentioned Russ, that some people may have silos or pieces of this in their environment. Oftentimes, those are just a snapshot in time, whenever the scan was run, whatever it is.
Yep.
So this is continuous. So if something changed the environment, you would see that directly be impacted in the risk score and the other things,
Yep.
Either negatively or positively. That also helps with cyber insurance, as Russ is mentioning, because anything that's going to reduce the risk is going to give you a benefit, on the premium side of it. And
Right.
having the continuous monitoring, of your risk level is something the providers do like to see in that.
Yeah,
So,
well, and any conversation that anybody is having about zero trust, right? It's such a big buzzword. It means a million things to different people. It depends on who you talk to, right? But at the root of any zero trust conversation is the ability to continuously assess risk. If you can't assess risk in real time and make real time access control decisions based on those findings, you will never accomplish any zero trust initiative, right? It all begins with a mature understanding of risk and a continuous ability to assess and respond to risk. So all those conversations about all those other technologies, they're great, but if we can't assess and prioritize risk, then we're going to fall down on all those other things. Make sense?
I think we're down to our last few minutes. There's a couple questions on here.
Okay.
Somebody mentioned they know that Vision One is sold in credits, which is of course true. So I want to know, how do you determine how many credits are actually needed? So I don't know if maybe you want to just show that real quickly.
So just briefly, we'll jump into the credit calculator or credit usage. The whole platform is licensed by sensor type, right? And the consumption unit is a credit. So, for example, to utilize ASRM functions is 20 credits per endpoint for the endpoint sensor. It's a bandwidth-based number for the network sensor. It's a mailbox-based number for the email sensor, right? So you can see how this works out. And so right in the console, you can see sort of how your credits are allocated, what each kind of function costs. And that's a whole licensing and sort of purchasing discussion that we'd be happy to get into deeper. But just recognize that there is and we talk about credits. It's probably the worst word we could have used. We should have called them like allocation units or something, because you don't spend credits. You allocate credits to a particular function for the duration of your contract period. So your credits don't expire and they don't go away. They just get applied to a function. If you don't need that function anymore, you can pull those credits back and apply them to a different function. So it's a flexible allocation unit that you can use to enable different parts of the ecosystem based on what your requirements are at that point in time. Make sense?
I think so. That answered the question here. Somebody else is asking, and I don't fully know the answer to this. Neither Russ or I on the MSP side of the house. But somebody's saying that they're currently using worry-free. So how can they move to Vision One? I know it can be done, but I don't know what that process is. It might be something we need to follow up with.
Yeah.
Russ, do you know offhand?
Well, it would definitely want to take that one offline. There is a worry-free sort of XDR equivalent or other side of the house, right? That's kind of our SMB space. And there is a full set of functions around worry-free. To get into Vision One and all the stuff that we talked about today, we got to get them into sort of the enterprise product line. And that's where this all comes about. And there is a process to go between, but we can follow up on that. Any other questions or thoughts? You got follow-ups? We're happy to do it. Whatever you got, however you guys want to work it.
Yeah, we're down to our final minute or two here, to Russ. I don't think there's anything you kind of want to close out in summary. Maybe things that customers gravitate to, or things that
so the one thing
the executives would like to see, those types of things. So
yeah, so this is what executives like to see right here. Is it red, yellow, or green? And how long is it going to take you to get it to the next better color? And when are you going to show me that, right? That's great for executives. That's really all they want to know. In terms of what customers gravitate to, we'll take just a moment on this, right? Most of the customers that I talk to, right, they are not normally mature security operations response teams from a detection and response perspective, right? but they understand risk management and risk prevention and risk reduction. This is what they've been doing for 10 years or 20 years, depending on how long they do it. They know how to do firewall rules. They know how to do email policies. They know how to patch. They know how to do this stuff. And they absolutely respond to this prioritized list of stuff to do. They love it. They don't like XDR. It's complicated and scary, and I need help with that. And I can't hire people who know it. So this is a great way to introduce them to the platform and ease them into detection and response. You can start from the XDR side and work your way back to ASRM, but the customers that I talk to, this risk prioritization resonates very, very powerfully with those folks.
I appreciate that, Russ. So
yep.
I think we are at the end of our time. Actually,
yep.
we might have gone a minute or so over. So appreciate people bearing with us. I know that we got a couple follow-up questions that people asked, so we will make sure those get directed to the right people so somebody can get back to you. If you think of anything else, after this, feel free to email myself or Russ, and we'll make sure that, we can either answer it direct or, again, get you in touch with the right person. So appreciate everyone's time today. Again, just feel free to reach out if there's anything. We're here to help. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.